But of the times and seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are the children of the light, and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of the darkness.
Hello, friends. The testimony you just heard was from the Apostle Paul, according to his first letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 5. And later you'll hear more from Paul in our depiction of a stimulating discussion with his fellow apostle Peter. But first, let's examine more closely some of Paul's words in that opening statement. You'll recall that he mentioned the day of the Lord, and implied it was a time familiar to all, which it certainly should be, but not always by that same word description. Because what Paul was referring to here is the period of time which will mark the end of this present age, when the Lord intervenes in the chaotic affairs of our world to establish his own long-promised kingdom. However, this same period is also described elsewhere in the Bible as the last days, or the day of God's vengeance. And in chapter 16 of the book of Revelations, it's called the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Then, as a further complication, that identical battle is referred to later in the same chapter by still another term. It's the one and only mention of the word in the Bible, yet throughout history, most have come to associate the end of the world with that single name: Armageddon. Given the convenient focus of one name, countless creative minds have tried over the centuries to provide us with their interpretations of what Armageddon will be like. Few have been very encouraging. Does that mean our world is truly condemned to perish in an epic struggle that will be climaxed by the fiery destruction of the earth? To answer that question, let's first consider the very word Armageddon and trace its meaning in both language and history. After careful study, it's been confirmed as being a word of Hebrew origin that was geographically associated with a crucial hill near the city of Megiddo in ancient Palestine, a location that's seen here as it appears today. We might also note here that the importance of a hill to the course of a battle has been well known to warriors of all times. It's generally conceded that whoever controls such high ground is in a commanding position to dictate the outcome. As we can see, this ancient city of Megiddo was situated in a very strategic corridor which controlled the trade route that connected Egypt with Mesopotamia. Consequently, from 1400 BC to almost the present day, the plains of Megiddo have been the scene of many major battles, including those of Gideon and his 300 who routed the Midianites, and Barak of Israel who defeated Sisera of Canaan. Yet, when we ask ourselves, will that great prophetic battle of Armageddon actually be fought on this exact ancient battlefield, our thoughtful response must be disagreement, because we believe that the name of Armageddon, like countless others mentioned in prophecy and history, is used here symbolically, as are many such words in our own time. For one example, even though Napoleon's final battle happened almost 2 centuries ago, his defeat is still used today in describing someone's similar misfortune as their Waterloo. And so, while we can accept that the name Armageddon is used in much the same manner, such symbolism certainly doesn't diminish its significance. because the most strikingly consistent feature in all the battles fought by the Israelites at Megiddo is that God's intervention decided the eventual result. And it didn't always favor the Israelites. Oftentimes, as in Josiah's defeat by Necho, Pharaoh of Egypt, God caused them to be defeated as a punishment or discipline, which again substantiates the belief that the prophesied Armageddon will be a struggle in which God once more takes the decisive role in determining the outcome. Of course, as we know from prophecy, the outcome of Armageddon will be a conclusive victory for righteousness that will permanently defeat all the forces of evil and prepare the way for the full manifestation of God's kingdom on earth. Still, we must remember that even Jesus himself, in contributing his own word description of this critical transition period, called it a time of great tribulation. And who could offer a better insight to the prophecies of Jesus than his devoted apostles, Peter and Paul?
You know, Peter, I often think how marvelous it must have been to be personally associated with Jesus, to hear the gracious words which fell from his lips.
Yes, Paul, it was. But there was much that he said which even we, his apostles, could not then understand, nor do we have a clear grasp of the details, even now.
I can well understand that. You must have wondered when Jesus announced to you that he was going to Jerusalem, that he would virtually surrender to his enemies, allow them to put him to death. Of course, we both understand now that it was necessary for Jesus to die in order to redeem the world from sin and death. But then it was different.
Quite different, indeed, Paul. You see, all we could think about then was the glorious messianic kingdom which we believed he would set up in Jerusalem, and through which he eventually would rule the whole world. To us, it was simply unthinkable that Jesus should be put to death.
But Jesus did give you a parable in which he indicated that he was going away and would return later to set up his kingdom.
Yes, that is right. However, it was not clear to us that he was going away in death. But soon after this, we did ask him about his return. We asked him for signs by which we could know that he had returned to set up his kingdom.
And I understand that Jesus gave you many signs, even though at the time you might not have understood their significance too clearly.
And you know, Paul, the sign which impressed me the most was the one which Jesus described as a great tribulation. In describing this sign, I believe that Jesus must have been thinking of Daniel's prophecy of a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation.
I think you're right, Peter. A time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation would certainly be a time of great tribulation. Did Jesus give any details as to the nature of this trouble?
Well, yes. Yes, he said that there would be upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity. He also said that because of this perplexity, the people would look ahead with fear to the things coming upon the earth. He illustrated the confusion and fear of the people by the roaring of the sea and the waves.
It would almost seem that the tribulation foretold by Jesus is something which the people would bring upon themselves. Does it appear this way to you, Peter?
It could be. And yet, Jesus said that unless the days of tribulation would be shortened, no flesh would survive. It's hard to understand how the people would bring such utter destruction upon themselves.
Certainly, if Peter and Paul were living on the earth today, they would have no difficulty understanding how the human race might destroy itself. For everywhere there is convincing evidence that we are now living through the times of great tribulation, which Jesus prophesied. He said that people would look with fear to the things coming upon the earth. And that fear is all too evident in the eyes and faces of millions around the world today. Fear of violence, starvation, sickness, destruction. And death. Peter recalled Jesus describing these times as a distress of nations with perplexity, and warning that unless these days were quickly shortened, no flesh would survive. Did he then mean our human race will ultimately destroy itself? Certainly not. Because all of the biblical prophets, from Daniel onward, who addressed this concern, have assured us that God's elect, led by Jesus himself, will bring these days of trouble to an end before there is total destruction. So we can trust that this final combat, like most of the ancient battles fought at Megiddo, will be ultimately decided by the miracle-working power of divine intervention. However, as we well know, any substantial change in the form of a nation's government is usually accompanied by a great deal of trouble. And so it will be in establishing Christ's rulership. Undoubtedly, it will cause some of the great tribulation mentioned by Jesus, but this is only incidental to the greater objective being accomplished, which is the divine rule of God's kingdom over the earth. To exemplify that belief, let's hear more from Peter and Paul as they discuss the significance of events that will precede Christ's return.
You know, Paul, another interesting point established by Jesus was his comparison of the time of his return with the days of Noah. As it was in the days of Noah, he said, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man.
Yes, Peter, I've learned about that. Jesus explained that in the days of Noah, just prior to the flood, the people continued on with their ordinary pursuits of life, eating and drinking, planting and building, totally unaware of the fact that a flood was coming upon them.
Yes, and Jesus made a very important application of that fact. He said that we should be on the watch to make sure that his day did not overtake us unexpectedly. Or, to use his own expression, as a thief in the night.
Which implies, of course, that those who are faithful watchers would know the significance of the events taking place around them and throughout the world in general.
And Jesus left no doubt as to what we should watch. Referring to the events associated with the Great Tribulation, which he foretold, he said, when ye see these things, then lift up your heads, for you will know that your deliverance is at hand.
Yes. Of course, Christ's second visit to earth will mean the deliverance of his own people from all evil, including death. And Peter, it will also mean the deliverance of the whole world of mankind from bondage to sin, sickness, and death.
Truly, the day of the Lord, as described by Jesus, is to be a wonderful time, both for the Master's faithful followers and for all the children of Adam. And Paul, I have a feeling that when that day comes, you and I will know about it, in the sense of understanding the significance of the events in the world as related to it.
I'm sure that's true, Peter. It's just as I wrote in one of my recent epistles. I said, ye brethren know perfectly well that the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief in the night.
Yes, I'm glad that you emphasize that the Lord's own people need not be unaware of what is really taking place in the day of the Lord. Yes. You know, I remember Jesus saying that at that time, the hearts of the people would be filled with fear as they looked ahead to the things coming upon the earth. And well they might. For a time of tribulation which is to threaten the destruction of all mankind will be a fearful thing to contemplate.
But, Peter, if we're on the alert and watching and understand what is really taking place, we will not need to fear, for we will have the assurance of being delivered into the kingdom of the Master. We will also know that a glorious time of blessing is near for the whole world of mankind.
As you heard, Paul compared the trouble which would come in the day of the Lord to being like the travail upon a woman with child. And when that analogy is judged in relation to recent history, it becomes quite appropriate. Because as we know, the distress endured by women in giving birth usually comes in spasms. Ordinarily, each severe labor pain is followed by a temporary period of easement. And this same pattern, which is a characteristic of the great tribulation foretold by Jesus, also typifies the progress of historic events during our present century. There have been periods of calm, followed by turmoil, which has then receded again, however briefly, to more peaceful times. So it can be said that if we are now living during that prophetic day of the Lord, then the First World War was surely the beginning of those birth pangs foretold by the Apostle Paul, who also warned, you'll recall, that the tribulation would come at a time when the people were saying peace and safety. The year 1913 was a time of international peace. People in general felt safe and secure as they enjoyed the benefits of wonderful new distractions. The governments of most nations were ruled by crowned royalty who promised stable continuity. But that promise was shattered by a single shot which killed a royal person and started the carnage called World War I. When it was over, most of the royal rulers were gone, and the world had forever changed. With peace came prosperity and, for a while, a period of unrestrained optimism. And then, suddenly, another catastrophe plunged most nations into a deep and desperate depression. Gradually, the world economy began to recover, and despite some disturbing omens, people looked hopefully toward a more secure future. Yet once more, those hopes were smashed by the horror of World War II. From the ashes of that devastation came renewed commitments to peace and mutual understanding. But all too soon, the same sadly familiar cycle reappeared with periods of harmony alternating with confrontations. Through all the years, to our present day. what we have learned about recent history, it would seem there is a destined progress toward even more destructive events, including the very obliteration of mankind, which is undoubtedly possible with the weapons available to world powers today. However, while we can never be certain regarding specific details of the future, the most important thing to remember is the assurance of God's word that despite all the trouble in our current world, the human race will survive. Not because man is now more capable of ruling himself than before, but because the foretold time will have arrived for the Lord to establish his kingdom and to bestow on the world the blessings of everlasting peace, health, and happiness through the agencies of Christ's government. To further evidence how remarkably consistent these biblical prophecies of redemption have been, let's listen to some final observations from Peter and Paul.
You know, Paul, it was most revealing to notice that Jesus' prophecies were exactly in harmony with what has been written by our prophets. Well, that was to be expected, of course, for in addition to being the Messiah, he was the greatest of all God's prophets.
True. And we would therefore expect that his testimony would be harmonious with what our God has spoken by mouth of all his holy prophets. The prophets foretold that Jesus would come to redeem the world from death and later establish a worldwide government of peace and righteousness. We know that he has already died to redeem the people from death, and now we're rejoicing in the blessed hope of his return to set up his kingdom.
Yes, the Lord used Moses to forecast that he would raise up a great deliverer, and that all the people would have an opportunity to hear and obey him and live. Everybody now is dying, but just think of the time when, through obedience to the divine Christ and the laws of his kingdom, those who believe and obey will not need to die.
We know that that is true, for the prophet Isaiah wrote that in Messiah's kingdom, the Lord would swallow up death in victory, that he would wipe away tears from all faces.
Yes. And Isaiah also wrote that all the blind eyes would be opened, and all the deaf ears would be unstopped, that the lame man would leap as a hart, and that the tongue of the dumb would sing.
I also recall the prophecy that the people in the day of the Lord's kingdom would not say, "I am sick." At the present time, sickness seems to be inseparably associated with human experience, but it won't always be so.
As you have said in the past, Paul, just as all in Adam are now dying, even so all are to be made alive through Christ, that Christ will reign until all enemies are put under his feet, and that the last enemy to be destroyed is death.
And Peter, it must have been wonderful to see Jesus illustrate these coming blessings of his kingdom by the miracles which he performed. I understand he healed all manner of sickness, even leprosy.
Yes. Yes, Jesus even raised the dead. And this also is to be one of the blessings of his kingdom. Isaiah wrote that the redeemed of the Lord shall return from death, and that they shall obtain joy and gladness, and that sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Oh, I tell you, Paul, it will be a grand day for this old world when Christ sets up his kingdom.
We are now almost 2,000 years closer to that glorious day Peter envisioned. And in the echo of his words, we're reminded of how privileged he was to be personally involved with Christ's earthly ministry. Yet if we fully understand that we are now living at a time when we can actually witness the fulfillment of so many things foretold by Jesus and other biblical prophets, we should rejoice in an equally rewarding experience. Because even though our world must inevitably endure the battle of that great day of God Almighty, we should realize that just beyond is a new day of deliverance. So we can be comforted in knowing that Armageddon will not be the end of the world, but rather an end to the era of evil, fear, and death. and the beginning of God's divine rule over the earth, which will bring everlasting life, peace, and happiness to the whole past and future family of mankind. These eternal truths are assured to us through the Bible's testaments.
To view the booklet online, visit www.dawnbible.com, or to receive a hard copy of the booklet by mail, send us your name and postal mailing address and ask for the booklet by name. The title of the booklet for this program is Armageddon, Then World Peace. Send an email or call us at 1-800-234-DAWN, or write to The Bible Answers. The booklet will be mailed to you free and without obligation. And now, goodbye, and may God bless you.